Hello, world.
Hello.
Welcome, welcome. Welcome to the Culture Clinic show where we help people leaders shape great workplace culture so that your people love where they work. As a quick intro, my name's Joe. I'm actually one of the founders over here at Gusto and have been working closely with HR professionals to build recognition programs to help them shape great culture. I've been doing that for about 10 years now. And I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Shelly DaCosta. Maybe a quick hello and intro, Shelly.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Shelley DaCosta. I've a former HR senior leader. I've been lucky enough to work for over 35 years in human resources, and particularly with a passion for rewards. Lucky enough to work for some really great organizations like Hamilton Health Sciences in the public sector, IKEA, Royal Sun Alliance in insurance, and BlackBerry. And along the way, managed to have some teaching gigs as well as some consulting. So always around rewards where my passion is. So thrilled to be here today just to talk about pay transparency.
Yes, a very hot topic, Shelly, and very pumped to be chatting with you. And for anyone who's watching, the topic is salary transparency, but the format for this is actually ask us anything. And to be more specific, you can ask Shelly anything. She's been in the trenches. She's seen so many things, through her career. And so feel free to chime in the chat. Anything related to people and culture, total rewards, recognition, best practices. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. But to kick things off, again, we're going to kind of lead with salary transparency, and we do have some questions that have already come in. So, Shelly, if you're ready, we've got a question.
Let's go.
Okay, cool. So this one's in from Janice Jenkins. It's a great question. How do I sell my executive team on salary transparency, and are there any potential benefits that I can point to, such as retention, recruitment, etc.?
Thanks, Janice. Wow, it's an interesting question because to me, there's some great ways to sell your executive team on why you need to do it. The big one is, of course, what we often refer to as the big stick. If there's legislation, so it depends on where your organization is, what country you're functioning in, et cetera. You may be well aware that in New York City, effective today, organizations with 4 or more employees have to post jobs with a salary range. So pay transparency is there. It's in. In Ontario, we had some legislation. It's been kind of kicked out, coming back, et cetera. But any kind of legislation will definitely help you because nobody wants to be fined, and organizations are, always wanting to be legislatively compliant, if you will. But separate from that, it's so important to have and represent a culture of transparency in your organization. So please understand it. And so to have your leaders or your executive team understand the wins from pay and salary transparency are gender wins in terms of pay equity, the compliance with that, a very transparent culture. It can lead to your job architecture and opportunities for employees to know for job advancement and career development. It's a huge opportunity to educate on total rewards in the organization. If done right, you end up with more educated leaders in the organization because they're able to explain differences and issues around salary and pay transparency. You build more trust and engagement for your employees. It's to me, it's a no-brainer, but I know it is sometimes difficult to get the executive team on that. So you got to kind of find out what the sweet spot is, depending on your executive team. I was lucky enough to work for some organizations where the executive team were the ones saying, "Pull it off, let's go. We want to go, transparent on pay and salary transparency." And I was the one having to kind of say, "Okay, well, we have to get our ducks in a row. We have to slow down, and we have to make sure we do it well."
Yeah, and you touched on a few things there that really resonated with me, as a leader at our company. And so, I think about sort of how things have changed over time, and millennials and Gen Z, who are now, making up a majority of the workforce. I mean, they're demanding transparency, and more broadly, they're demanding great culture. And so for me as a leader, there's sort of a few things that come to mind. One, you already touched on it, transparency builds trust, right? And so with trust, it will actually help an organization attract and retain talent. And there's this really great book, and Shelley, you put me onto this book. It's called The 7 Hidden Reasons Employees Leave. And what's interesting is that in this huge study, 88% of voluntary turnover was not related to money. And so I'm simplifying here things a little bit here, but most turnover can actually be pinned back to a moment where trust is lost. And so the more you can do to build and maintain trust, the more likely it is that people are going to stay with your organization. So that was one thing. And then, the other thing, more and more, especially with the current generation, people really want clear growth and advancement opportunities. And so if we can provide a clear roadmap for pay increases and career development, this is going to help us attract better talent and keep great people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It all fits together. It's just
totally
so many domino effects that are wonderful in an organization.
Let's get transparent. Okay, let's move on. This is also a really great question. So this came in from Kelly. What are the potential pitfalls of transparency?
So the pitfalls are, the biggest one is if you're not ready. And by ready, I mean, have all your ducks in a row to totally open up your compensation books, if you will, and start to post salaries attached to jobs. So when you post a job, you have a vacancy, you're now going to post a salary range. You're not going to post individual salaries, although I know there are generations that would love that, and they're already doing that. They're sharing their job offers, and they're sharing their pay statements and things like that, and other generations in the workplace are aghast. But it's where we're definitely heading. But the pitfalls are if you have some salary inequities, or if your employees have a lot of questions about it and your leaders aren't prepared to answer those questions. So that's where I would, in some organizations, say you got to slow down and make sure you really get your leaders up to speed on the kinds of questions they have. So let's take an example that you post a salary range for a vacant position, and a colleague of that vacant position sees the salary range and finds out that actually it's a different salary range than they know that they are in. So their first comment is they're going to go to their leader and say, what the heck? Why? What is this? Can you explain it to me? Because we know that we want to build trust between the leader and the employee. Studies all show, and it's not something HR loves to hear, but studies all show that employees trust their leaders more than they trust human resources. I'm not saying all organizations it's that way. I know it hurts. It really hurts deep down. But nonetheless, I understand it. And having been a leader myself, that's what I want, is that trust with those employees to come to me before they go to human resources, let's say. But if you haven't armed or educated your leaders with the information as to why that job is higher than that job, why that job's an E and that job's a D, and therefore has a different salary range attached to it. And it could be a myriad of, reasons. It's went through job evaluation. It's actually a different role. It requires some different education or experience or something along those lines. If they haven't got those answers at the ready to explain that, they're going to shift them right over to human resources. And the employee now you've lost the opportunity to build that trust with the leader. You've lost the opportunity to educate the employee, to have a leader that really knows all of that information to pass along, and to be able to have a great conversation about total rewards. So that's, to me, one of the biggest pitfalls. And then, just if you have some inequities that you haven't had a chance to take care of or to understand what you need to do to defend, you want to make sure you do that. So, it's take your time is my big message there. It's a huge opportunity to go transparent, but just make sure that you're ready for it.
Yeah, it's a great point, Shelley. And I think there's a parallel here with recognition, in that sometimes we see companies that have never run a recognition program want to go like full bore, let's launch this huge program
Rip it off.
And
Yeah.
while the intention is good, in many instances, it's actually a mistake. And we would suggest crawl, walk, run. Let's take some incremental steps forward. Let's generate support internally and then maybe iterate, because we may not get it perfect out of the gate, make adjustments and kind of like expand the program as we go.
Great.
Now, we've got a question in the chat, and it actually is very similar to another question that we got in advance here, and it's around ranges. So, Nimra, we see you, and I'm going to move on to our next question, and hopefully we cover your question here. So this one came in from Karen, but Nimra, again, I see your question. Please chime in if we don't cover it. But Shelley, here's the question. For job posting ranges, what is the thinking or preference on wide or narrow bands?
So wide or narrow bands really dependent on what you currently have in your compensation strategy, like your compensation philosophy and your theory. Like, so do you have narrow bands and there's no overlap between the salary ranges? How many ranges do you have? Is there overlap? Isn't there overlap? How wide they are? What's the percentage off the midpoint? All of those compensation depends on how complex you are, etc. Probably narrower bands where there is an overlap could have less questions for employees because they can clearly see, okay, there's a beginning and an end, and then the next job there's a beginning and end, and there isn't the overlap. Whereas if you have broader ranges where there is overlap, on one hand, the broader ranges are going to be help people understand why when they find specifics out. So let's go back to an employee. Joe looks at the salary range posted for a colleague's job, and he knows, and the salary range is $75,000 to $100,000. And Joe knows he's making 80,000, but the person who just left the job was making 95. Right. So he looks at that and he goes, okay, so that's good. We were both in the salary band. Now he may have questions specific to the fact that he knew what that person was making, but pay transparency isn't really covering that, it's covering the salary band. But they both fit in there because it was broad. Whereas if it was narrow and he knew that person was making 110, but the salary band ended at 85, they may have more questions. So I wouldn't really suggest you adjust your salary bands prior to posting or going transparent. I think you stick with what you have, the conviction and the what you've designed for your salary range, and ensure you're able to defend it. I wouldn't say that I have a preference on one or the other because we use compensation bands, right? Depending on the size of the organization, the number of the job classes, the comparisons, how many groupings you're doing. There's just a myriad of things in the compensation world that would dictate wide or narrow bands. And there's going to be pluses and minuses with both scenarios when you post it, depending on what's your situation and what employees know and what you're willing to teach them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably more important, is how well you can explain what you're posting.
Yeah, we talk a lot about being able to sort of back up your decisions with the why you made the decision, right?
That's right. They may not like the fact that they put their job in for job evaluation and it came out as a D and they were expecting and hoping that their job would go to an E, which is a job they saw posted. And, in compensation and perhaps with a leader, it's an opportunity to have employees understand the why. May not like the answer, but it's our job to help them understand the answer.
Cool. That's great, Shelley. And I'm going to build on this because we have a question from Nimra, who's in the audience here. And I think that it flows well into kind of what you've been discussing. So how can we build a culture of salary transparency internally by disclosing ranges for roles? What are the necessary processes that must exist in a company before that can happen?
So like I've said before, it's a lot of communication and in transparency to leaders. It's really great if you can almost open up the books to employees. So a great example in my mind anyway was I worked with an organization, a very large manufacturing team And what we did was we created a compensation committee of these frontline workers, and they became our compensation group, and we trained them. My goal was, I said, look, after this, you know, you're going to be able to apply for jobs in the organization as a compensation analyst because you're going to understand all of this. And we literally had meetings where we walked them through salary bands, salary ranges, market data, and a salary regression line. So we actually showed them, you know, this job has this many points, this job has this many points, and here's the points relative to the market. Right. And so if we at the organization at that point in time wanted to be a 50th percentile payer, here's the salary line for this, and here's where your job fits. And here's the information that make up that salary survey. So we went into like organizations that we see as competition for our talent. This organization, this organization, this organization. Here's their salaries, which creates that salary line. Here's where your jobs are on that salary line. Here's the differences. And really open that up to create this group of very educated employees that could pass along this information to their coworkers and really understood it. So much that when it came to comp and salary planning time, we would ask them for their opinion. We would, you know, go to that group and say, okay, we did the market survey. Here's the market data. This is what's come back. You know where we stand right now. You know how well or poorly we're doing. Here's where we fit relative to the market. Do you think we should be going to senior leadership and looking for a 1% increase, a 2% increase, or 3% increase based on what you're seeing? And it was phenomenal to have them come forward and make recommendations to say, it's really important that we keep our jobs. And so we're not going to ask for more. Why should we be paid more? You know what I mean? Like, because they understood it now. They understood what was on the executive and the compensations team in making those decisions and for their leaders. And what was so great about that was it led into that bigger discussion of base pay only being one component of total rewards. And so to build the culture of salary transparency, I would also say, Nimra, that it's really helpful if you can use that total rewards concept as a stepping stone to have employees understand that base pay is only one component. There's so many other things, and this is an opportunity to platform all those other things that they don't really realize are actually a reward or part of their total rewards. So whether it's great benefits programs, with the great unpaid leave programs or paid leave programs, or vacation plans, or recognition, you know, that there's recognition that's going on, or service awards for their employees, all of those kinds of things. It's that total rewards piece so that employees are making a decision to say, you know what, maybe we're only a 50% payer. That's what pay transparency is showing me, but everything else looks great. And I get this here. Whereas when I look externally, I wouldn't get those things. So it's a great opportunity to showcase your recognition and rewards culture.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great advice. Engage with your people through the process and make sure you're kind of communicating the whole value proposition around compensation and total rewards. So it makes me think about the question that came in around kind of posting ranges on job postings. You know, and it kind of ties into what you said here, Shelley, but while salary is very important to candidates, it's definitely not the only thing that matters, right? Like, times have changed. Millennials and Gen Z, who make up a majority of the workforce, want to work at organizations that align with their purpose and values. And so when you think about job posting and being transparent about pay, it's also an opportunity to post about other things like your core values, as that's an opportunity to attract and engage the right people, as well as an opportunity to communicate all of the other great benefits of working at the company. So things like unlimited paid time off. We actually offer this at Gusto, and we make sure we post that when we go out and look for candidates. We're also talking about our robust recognition program. And we hear so often from candidates that they applied because of our commitment to recognition and culture, and not just because of the salary band that we posted.
And so that's why all that transparency can set you up so much as such an attractive employer to attract really great talent. but it also helps you to retain your current great talent in your organization, because a lot of people will tell you, "Oh, until I saw that job posted, I had no idea what we have," or until I went to that seminar, I didn't realize we had this, because I didn't read that benefits material or that information. But here again, with pay transparency, an opportunity for your existing employees to see what there is and to engage in that total rewards, whether it's a total reward statement or sessions that you're doing, communication, etc., for them to understand all the other components that make it such a great place to work.
Mm-hmm. Keeping one eye on the clock here, we have a few more questions to tackle. So let's keep moving along here. So next question, Shelley. I want to implement salary transparency, but I'm aware that there are pay inequities in the company for various reasons. How do I start fixing that?
So one step at a time, again, the crawl, walk, run, but I would try to sort through what they are, right? Get in there, use the legislation that may pertain to your organization, whether that's older pay equity legislation, or there's a lot of employers want to be able to be certified as paying a living wage. There's some legislation around that as well too, not required in our country, but in other countries. So some global organizations will want to have that worldwide to say that all their salaries are at least at a living wage, and to use that with the executive team to say, I need to go in and fix this. We have a population, this group of employees are paid below the living wage for this region in this area. I need the dollars to fix that. Or pay equity shows us that this job should be paid comparable to this job and it's not. I need to fix that. And so that helps you kind of get that executive team support on fixing those inequities. And then there's inequities that they could be in place because they might require stages over time. Like I can do, niggle away at it this month, and then next year I can do another adjustment and another adjustment. So over time, but at least that's something you can explain to employees. Yes, we are aware of that inequity. We're addressing it, and here's how we're addressing it, and this is when it will be completed by. Or there may be situations where, an individual's red circled is very individual, not to do so much with salary ranges. Or some people call it, grandfathering. I prefer like a legacied or exempted employee type of situation. And you don't want to get into the he and she and all of those situations. But if you've got your defense, that's part of it. So there's things that you'll be able to fix right away before you go transparent. And I'd suggest do as much as you can of that. And use whatever you can to help fix those, because it might mean you have to throw some money at something to fix it, or and then be diligent around having your defenses on the things that you can't fix or will take time to fix.
I mean, can you move to salary transparency without fixing pay inequities? Like, is that just a disaster?
You're heading for some big issues, depending on what the inequities are, right? Like if they're, individual inequities, pay transparency is not going to show those up, not right away, right? Because pay transparency is showing me the salary range.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily going to show me that, isn't it interesting? All the males in the salary range are paid above the 50th, of the midpoint of the range, and all the females are. You better be fixing those right away, whether they become, transparent or not. But yeah, so it's more about the ranges overall, and you want to fix those. But the individual ones, it's a great opportunity to fix those for when people do, because as you said, certain generations now, they're sharing. The water cooler talk is, I just got this bonus, I got that bonus, and people are comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Like, everyone kind of knows what everyone's being paid. Let's just assume that all of our people are talking about their compensation, right? Like, and so in many ways, I think transparency is a forcing function to removing or significantly reducing pay inequities. And, I think there's a parallel here with recognition. And, if a recognition program is not inclusive of all employees, it can be really upsetting to people that are not included. And so, for example, in a retail environment, when a company, and we do see this at times, when a company only rewards and recognizes people who work, let's say, at the corporate office, they're creating inequities across their employee base. And so in recognition, the program needs to be inclusive, whether, you know, employees are online, offline, at a store, in a warehouse, like it just needs to be inclusive. And so I think that there is a parallel here with pay. Yeah.
And I often say that pay isn't always a massive motivator, but an inequity in pay is a massive disengager. It's a demotivator for sure. So, you know, the paying people, it better be fair and equitable and correct, and you better be able to defend it, because if it's not, then you're going to have people lack of trust, lack of engagement, wanting to leave your organization to someplace where they feel recognized and rewarded appropriately.
Totally. And, you know, conversely, if you're open and transparent and people understand what they need to do to sort of like reach a competency that will allow them to advance in their career, they're actually going to be more proactive in upskilling and staying engaged if there's a clear path to career advancement, right?
Oh, for sure. And think of that conversation now that employee is having with their leader, because that leader now understands the difference between a salary D and a salary E and job evaluation and what that all means. So now they're having this open, transparent conversation with their D level employee on what the next steps are for them to get to an E, whether it's in their team or another team somewhere else in the organization, so that they can stay, keep, and grow that talent.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Let's we've got a last question here, unless any more come into the chat. And then hopefully, I've been trying to take some notes as you're, you know, delivering such great information here, but I'll try and sort of recap some takeaways at the end. But last question up on the board here, Shelley, this one came in from Teresa. How do you, and you've got, you know, you've touched a little bit on some of this, but how do you explain why someone might be low in the salary range?
Okay, so first of all, it won't necessarily show when you do pay transparency. Most of the legislation right now is all about posting a min and a max. But that employee now comes to the leader and says, okay, so there's this max and I'm low. Why am I so low? Right. And so the conversation is around what they started at, when they came in, what they negotiated, when they came into their salary range. And sometimes it is what it is, right? Historically, you may not have even been the HR person at the time or whatever. And sometimes our salary bands are so broad, right? But our budget for salary increases is so small. So you've got a 20% salary band, but you're giving 1, 2, maybe 3% increases this year on year over year. It's going to take somebody a very long time to get to the midpoint. It could be that the salary band has changed and adjusted and gone up since the employee went into there, like the band itself moved higher and they didn't get an increase to move them along. So that could be one of it. It could be lack of experience, expertise, or they were put in the salary band knowing they're going to grow to that over time. So.
Yeah, and you know, I think that there's also an opportunity here. So let's say someone has reached a certain competency, but it's outside of your compensation review cycle. So they feel like they've upskilled and, you know, they should be, in essence, paid more. But you can't just kind of like always be giving raises every day, right? You got to, you know, in many cases be working within a cycle. And so I actually think that there's a really great opportunity to leverage a rewards and recognition program, because it should always be happening, but you can really lean into these programs. And as leaders, you can show extra appreciation to those employees and bridge the gap between sort of now, that time where they've upskilled, and the next comp review. So,
or find out the other things that are really going to motivate that employee. Now they think, oh, geez, I'm really low in the salary range, but maybe they want to grow a career with the organization. They're D level. Let's start looking for an E level job. What do we need to do to give you the experience? So the next time that job's posted and it goes along with a 10% salary increase, you're the ideal candidate. What can we do to help that? Because you're a high potential employee that we want to keep happy and we want to grow and keep with the organization. So again, it's all open to that trust and that conversation and education for your employees.
Love it, Shelley. You're spitting fire today. This is good. This is good. So we're on the half hour. I think we've kind of like nailed the timing here. We've whipped through some great questions. I've been trying to take some notes for some key takeaways. So I will synthesize those, but just chime in if I kind of like missed anything or didn't get it right. So key takeaways: one, be prepared. So use your leaders to convey and explain information, because at the end of the day, employees generally trust leaders more than HR. Like, that's you saying that, not me. Second takeaway, be transparent about how pay is set in the organization. So whether you're using surveys, whether you're at the front of the pack in terms of where you pay at a percentile, whether you're maybe not at the front, but at the back of the pack, but you're doing other things to sort of beef up the total rewards package. So be transparent. That was number two. And then use transparency, number three, as a key opportunity to discuss total rewards and other amazing programs that you're offering your employees, because pay isn't everything.
Right.
And then last one here I threw down: pay isn't always a great motivator, but inequity of pay is a huge demotivator.
Right.
So yeah, did I get them?
You were hanging on my every word, Joe. That was awesome.
Okay. So be prepared, be transparent, use transparency as an opportunity to discuss total rewards, and pay isn't always a great motivator, but inequity is a huge demotivator.
So fix it.
That's right.
Great.
Awesome. Well, amazing chat, Shelley. And for those who joined, thank you so much. And if you're interested in staying tuned with other culture building content, please head over to YouTube. We've got a robust channel where we're often putting content out there. You can subscribe there, or go to gusto.com and you can subscribe to our newsletter for all sorts of ongoing culture building tips. And with that, we will say mucho gusto.
Thank you. Mucho gusto.
Thanks, Shelley.